Right. So far, nearly 1 million people have signed the petition to bring back Jeremy Clarkson. Freedom to fracas, it declares, he says carefully. With a BBC investigation underway about the alleged handbags and pushing, we can't comment. But given the scale of the support for Jeremy Clarkson and the howls of protest at the apparent cancellation of the rest of the series of Top Gear, we ask, has Britain become hostile to blokes? Martin Daubney, former editor of Loaded, he's kind of, he's emblematic, isn't he? He sticks his head above the parapet, he says what he thinks, he does what he likes, and he just gets on with it. And he's a heroic figure for a lot of, not just men, but women, but he kind of cuts that role, doesn't he?
Well, he's an incredibly divisive character. On the one hand, he's greatly admired by his audience. I think it's precisely because he has the balls, frankly, to say what people otherwise are afraid to say.
I'm about to faint.
That makes him incredibly unpopular with his critics, and his critics tend to be the opposite demographic. So we hear a lot of angry, sort of, female voices. And it was interesting this week, I think, how, within 2 days, the same number of people had signed the petition for him to stay than signed the campaign for Page 3 to be dropped from The Sun in 2 years. So this guy is incredibly popular. But on the same hand, he became an interesting thing. He became a magnet, not only for sort of anger about Clarkson in general, but there was so much criticism about the fact that he was white and that he was male. And it's like, wow, what's going on here?
Well, let's take it away from Jeremy, if I may, and just talk about that broader issue and the underlying issue here. Is there a crisis in masculinity with a big M?
Well, we're often told that there is, because that's another sort of stick that's used to beat men. I hear it all the time. What's actually happening is that, being a man has changed radically, because how we define ourselves has changed. We no longer do traditional jobs, the stay-at-home mum thing. I was a stay-at-home dad for 6 months, believe it or not, after Loaded. How we be men has changed. But where I'm really worried about all of this is particularly on university campuses. I used to be called the king of the lads, rather embarrassingly. My magazine was a standard bearer for the lad lifestyle, for which I became a great target of malice. Fair enough, it goes with the turf. But young British men, I think, are now being demonised on university campuses because the whole lad culture, the dapper laughs thing, he became this cartoon, caricature version of what a lad is, and he was used to contaminate the entire movement. Now, every young man on university campus who likes to drink and is a bit yobbish...
Banter.
Yeah, banter, but where does banter end? Where does it begin? Who knows? We are seeing an incredible suppression of free speech in our universities. In fact, Kate, you yourself were sort of taken off university campus because you're the wrong sort of feminist. Now, I think
I'm not sure that's got anything to do with dapper laughs. I think that's utterly...
I think it runs to the heart of the same debate, and that is about the fact that some people find it offensive, millions don't, but the minority of people who find it offensive are controlling what the rest of us are allowed to say or do. It's actually about freedom of speech.
It's about freedom of speech.
Well, firstly, Jeremy Clarkson is not about freedom of speech. It's about whether there was a fight. It doesn't matter whether there's a petition.
Let's move on to those who support him and those who feel that their freedoms have been curtailed.
Let's talk about this crisis of masculinity or whatever. First of all, is there a war on men? Well, no, there simply isn't, is the answer. If you look at any of the corridors of power, men massively outnumber women in this country and all around the world. But is there, these days, that there's a difference between men, isn't there, and blokes or lads or this kind of culture, which, you're right, is a relatively new thing. 100 years ago, there wasn't this culture of, lad culture. It's a very modern 21st century thing.
I actually disagree with that. I think there were probably lads in the cavemen time. I mean,
but I don't think they were the same. I don't think that it was the same situation that we've got now with sort of like widespread, very violent online pornography, this kind of stuff that is new, and it's a new challenge for people to deal with. And is there, a reaction to that and a backlash against that? Are people... Because I think that actually, you're right, young guys at university, they're being sold this story of like, yay, Jack the lad, drink loads, go out, you're expected to have hundreds of girlfriends and all this kind of stuff. And I think that they're being encouraged sometimes to behave in a way that isn't appropriate. And I think if people are pushing back against that, then that's great news.
There's a backlash, but there's now a backlash, as we can see, against the backlash. This is the point. And, some men feel they're not allowed to be men. I'm just, talk about the banter. When Jeremy Clarkson says, apologies to anyone who's offended by this, when he does a thing on German cars, and he said the navigation systems only go to Poland, there were complaints from... See, Milo liked it. We'll come to Milo in a minute. There were complaints from diplomats. There was outrage in the press. Isn't it just the sort of thing that lads like to say in a bit of banter with their...
Isn't there a difference between
I think the issue is not that bloke behaviour equals the behaviour of all men. That simply isn't true. It's this bullying behaviour that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable in the workplace. It's unacceptable in the media. That is the issue. Freedom of speech, absolutely, I support.
Abdullah, on men in crisis.
I think the problem is that Jeremy Clarkson, why are people bringing in his sex or gender in this? An individual in a workplace had an altercation with his boss. It happens all the time. Why are people focusing on his gender? Isn't that sexist?
Well, there's going to be an inquiry on that. Do you think that roles have become blurred? Do you think that some men feel that they are not allowed to be men anymore in our society in 2015?
I feel that there's a greater stigma on males than there would be on females. Certainly, if you see that if a woman did exactly the same thing as Jeremy Clarkson said, no one would say that. Is there a problem with women today or so on?
So it's kind of tougher for men.
They would view it as very sexist. So the fact that we're okay to bring up Jeremy Clarkson's gender in this shows the problem, that there is an issue of stigma attached to men. Whenever we do something, it will be reflected in the media as part of our gender.
I'm sorry, speaking as a woman who does stand-up comedy, any time I do a show and something isn't perfect about this show, somebody starts talking about women in comedy. The idea that women are not stigmatised by the actions of individuals within their number is a complete myth. It's just not
Milo, what is it?
Not to the same degree as men.
No,
my point was to the same degree.
More than men. We talk about women in politics and the way they dress. We don't talk about men in politics and the way they dress. The idea that men are specially stigmatised, I'm sorry, but that's a ridiculous
It's not
myth.
ridiculous.
The truth is
and it's offensive to say it's ridiculous because, once again, it's just all dismissed. Now, I'm a committee member of the Being a Man Festival at the South Bank Centre, where we are trying to give men an opportunity to be able to talk about things that matter. The biggest killer of men under 45 in the UK is suicide. You know, what's happening? Why is this going on? Right? And I'll tell you why.
But to say...
listen,
but Martin, to
can I
suggest
talk?
that it's... But if you're going to say this is not...
OK, let Martin talk.
What's happening is that the Campaign Against Living Miserably, the charity that represents this, is desperate for more funds to look into why this is going on. But they're not getting it. And I'll tell you why, because men don't qualify as a minority interest, and we don't get preferential funding. Right? You can bet your life. If women start killing themselves, you know, or Muslims did, or black guys, you know, there would be, you know, front-page news, guaranteed government inquiry, millions of pounds of funds. White men...
Wait a minute, Sally Peck. Let's bring Sally Peck here.